Welcome back to DBD TV, the Dragon Ball Dissection spin-off where I reevaluate the arcs of Dragon Ball based on the changes made in the animated adaptation. It feels like we just left the Majin Buu arc, but now we're back. It's a long 92 episode journey we're taking, so I don't want to waste any time. I do want to preface though that things are going to be a little different this episode. I'm going to be focusing more tightly on a specific area than I typically do in these videos because the animated version of the Majin Buu arc gets off to an unprecedentedly different start. It deserves a closer look. I feel I've heard fans bandy this idea about for years that, just like the Saiyan arc, maybe the Buu arc would have benefited from relaunching as a new series rather than keeping it under the Dragon Ball Z label. I certainly think there is a case to be made that the Buu arc feels about as good a place to do that as the Saiyan arc does. There's a very clean break between those arcs and the arcs that immediately precede them. The tone is a marked difference from the previous arcs. I also think, however, there's a ready-made justification that helps its animated counterpart already seem like part of a new series. That's the fact that Dragon Ball Z not only gets brand new opening and ending animations, but brand new songs to go with them. The same is true for the recap and preview music and the eye catches. No more Chala Head Chala, no more Zenkai Power, and that is the only context in which I will ever use the Z word in Dragon Ball Dissection. Zenkai is in the name of Dragon Ball Z's ending song, which itself is referenced as the title of episode 84. It ain't no Saiyan near-death power-up, that's just fan nonsense. As long as I'm tying up loose ends, I might as well mix metaphors and bury this one. It's just stupid. But if you want a deep dive into how this craziness might have gotten started, there is a wonderful thread on the Kanzenshu forums by the ever-insightful Cypher, which I will link to in the description. This is already off topic enough. I never really mentioned Zenkai Power when I covered the Saiyan arc. It's a wacky, silly song that takes time to grow on you. Well, it grew on me, but it seems a lot of people don't care for any of its 199 appearances. I think its apple-colored monsters and nut-scented aliens and Pika Pika the Galaxies of Popcorn Shower are wonderfully charming lyrics. That said, We Were Angels is the very first Japanese Dragon Ball theme song I ever heard, even if it was just in MIDI form on a late 90s fan page. It's long been one of my favorite DB themes. Not only does it feature Kageyama Hironobu singing his heart out, as if there is any song in which he doesn't, it hits the perfect balance of energy and melancholy. Paired with the visuals, it really does give a sense of the amount of history that Dragon Ball has accumulated over the years. It also mistakenly convinces me that Yamcha is going to have a much larger role in this arc than he actually does. The opening song is replaced with We Gotta Power, and I defy you to find a more wonderfully English title. I think the best part is that when Kageyama sings the actual title line, it sounds like the grammatically mundane We Got Power, so I have no idea where gotta even comes from. I like it, but I don't like it as much as its ending counterpart. I don't like it as much as Chala. I don't like it as much as Makafushigi Adventure. It's good. It's great. It's pumping. It's exciting. I used an instrumental for the opening after all. It's just not as good as any of its predecessors, and I think that's unpopular to say. When you get right down to it though, the song is the least fascinating part of this opening. It's really the animation sequence I want to talk about. It is the most gloriously inappropriate time capsule you could ever hope to see. It is a 1 and 45-second montage of every discarded idea the Majin Buu arc has. It stars Gohan, charting his growth through the years, showing him lead the others into glorious battle, keeping the world safe as the Great Saiyaman. Goku only shows up twice, including the main cast group shot at the end. As for that main cast group shot, it's created by taking the title page of chapter 420 and expanding it to include other prominent characters outside of the main Dragon Team Budokai participants. That means Bluma, Chi-Chi, Videl, and Shapna and Ereza? Ereza even gets a prominent "Is this a love triangle?" sequence too. This is the funniest unintentional joke Dragon Ball has ever made. After the first 4 episodes of the arc, these two are demoted to cameos for the rest of the series. Yet for 92 episodes, the message the show gives us is, screw Yamcha, screw the Muten Roshi, these characters are the future of Dragon Ball. To be fair, the opening animation Dragon Ball use for its first 101 episodes became outdated after its first 13. Still, those images at least represent a complete story arc, and it's not as if the series immediately moves away from everything rendering those images or characters relevant. It still largely gets across what and who you're going to see when you tune in from week to week, even if they look a little different and other characters have been added to the ranks. This opening is a complete non sequitur for most of its use. Whatever series this is promoting, though, looks like a lot of fun. I wish I could see more of it. I certainly don't blame Toei for this. They're working with what they thought the series would be, and as such, it perfectly demonstrates how unfocused the Majin Buu arc is. It's so jarring to still be seeing the show promoting Gohan's high school adventures while Majin Buu is laying waste to the world. See, look at that. I have no idea how long covering this arc is going to take because I've already spent this much time talking about the credits. That opening, for what it's worth, does perfectly fit the first few episodes at least, and the first few episodes are what I want to focus on because they are among my favorites in the entire franchise. And they are somewhat insane. Remember I told you a few years ago that the whole reason Dragon Ball Z exists as a separate series is that Toriyama's editor, Torishima Kazuhiko, replaced key staff positions on the TV series because he thought they weren't staying accurate enough to the manga? Well, it's a good thing he's not Toriyama's editor at this point, because the opening act of the Buu arc has to be the most substantial change Toei ever made while adapting the original Dragon Ball. And while the changes here aren't terribly shocking in general, remember that when animated Dragon Ball is adapting the manga, it's largely a panel-for-panel recreation. That's why it's such a shock that the Great Saiyaman section of the story is almost completely rewritten. It's obvious they wanted to expand the Great Saiyaman's role in the story to squeeze out a few filler episodes. However, Toriyama presents it in a way that makes it impossible to do that. Gohan becomes the Great Saiyaman, and the moment he jumps into action, Videl deduces who he is, and that's the end of that. Because of that, animated Dragon Ball jettisons this entire sequence. Animated Dragon Ball is known for adding new material whole cloth. It's very rare for them to expunge manga material. However, it's not unprecedented. The Kyoken is removed, Zarbon informing Vegeta of Frieza's transformations is left out seemingly by accident. There's the whole Cho Shinsui incident. Even right around here, the anime cuts out a single panel of Gohan running into Dr. Brief while waiting for his transformation device. But most of those are quick cuts. This is an entire sequence, a major turning point that's thrown out. The criminals manga Great Saiyaman and Videl apprehend don't exist here, but they are represented in the opening sequence. Ironically, this gives them a much larger role as they technically appear in 92 episodes. Again, let me make that clear. Nameless criminals who aren't even in the show get a larger showcase in the opening than most of these guys do. Instead of that scene, Videl meets Great Saiyaman when he saves her during a bus jacking. She still thinks he looks stupid, but doesn't deduce who he is. This leads into a few more episodes of Great Saiyaman and Gohan in high school shenanigans. Gohan saves Videl, Videl becomes obsessed with finding out who Great Saiyaman is, Gohan has to go on a date with a girl he thinks has figured out his identity, but who actually only knows he wears embarrassing underwear. For a few weeks, Dragon Ball Z becomes completely episodic, with each installment focusing on a new Great Saiyaman adventure. This doesn't go on for too long. Videl still finds out who Great Saiyaman is at the end of the 5th episode. That leaves less than 3 episodes that are wholly original. However, I cannot overstate how huge an improvement this is over the manga. These episodes are fantastic on their own. They're a lot of fun and very different from how Dragon Ball usually is. They manage to justify all the time spent building up Great Saiyaman and Orange Star High School so that they no longer feel like confusing missteps. Does this move the larger story in any real way? I'll admit, not really. However, it does result in a far better setup for Gohan's and Videl's eventual romance. Gohan is no longer simply some random weirdo Videl goes to school with for 2 days. They actually build a real connection forged by fire, Literally in some cases. Gohan saves her life on multiple occasions. Videl stymies him at every turn. She suspects Gohan but can't prove it. She benefits from Great Saiyaman's help, but also resents him for butting in. He in turn comes to respect her skill and good intentions. Their relationship is complicated. They're kind of allies, but they're also kind of antagonistic, each doing what's necessary to further their own individual goals, even if it screws over the other person. In their final encounter, they are literally fighting on opposite sides. It makes Videl's blackmail of Gohan feel far more justified and understandable. Pushing each other's boundaries has been their entire dynamic. But that underlying trust and gratitude built up over time also makes it more believable when Videl falls for him. She hasn't known who he is for very long, but she has gotten to know him, both sides of him. The "I'll cut my hair so Senpai will notice me" bit is still just as stupid, but I do buy this relationship much more in the animated version. In this retelling, Videl finds out who Gohan is in a much more convoluted way. An evil circus entrepreneur steals a baby dinosaur from Gohan's neck of the woods, so he turns into the Great Saiyaman and steals the baby back. This puts him on the wrong side of the law, forcing him into a fight with Videl. And that's the perfect culmination. Videl is on the side of the law, but you can tell she has been itching for any excuse to test herself against Great Saiyaman. It's far more personal than practical. However, the law eventually comes around when they realize stealing a baby dinosaur is going to turn their city into a kaiju movie. Sure enough, the parents show up, and while Gohan is trying to calm them, he blurts out his actual name right in front of Videl. Because Gohan has to clean up the loose ends afterwards, Videl is kind enough to wait until they're alone at school to confront him over it. It places the reveal in a far more dramatic scenario, and it steamrolls over Toriyama's original joke, but this revised version is funny in its own way. See, the following episode jumps back into adapting things properly. So properly, they don't bother to update the dialogue to account for everything that's been changed. So just like in the manga, when Gohan has to explain to Bluma how Videl knows who he is, he tells her that she recognized his voice, which is what Videl tells him in Toriyama's version, but has nothing to do with how she figures it out here. It's funny enough that this completely contradicts all the time they've spent together where Videl never picks up on his voice, but if you're like me and saw this before you read it, and your little brain is trying to rationalize how this makes sense, it becomes even funnier. To me, this dialogue read as Gohan being far too embarrassed to admit that he actually did something as stupid as call out his own name, so he decides to cover it up with an obvious lie. Oh, she just, recognized my voice and stuff, and also that my name is Gohan. To me, that's far funnier than Toriyama's joke. I'm funnier than you are, Toriyama, deal with it. Sure, he also mentions the cut Videl gives him during their fight, but that makes it even weirder that the voice thing is left in. There is definitely a case to be made in preferring the manga version and its silly abruptness. They are basically presenting two distinct ideas. Dragon Ball is lampooning superheroes, particularly the idea of secret identities. What makes you think you can put on a helmet without Videl knowing who you are, especially given she saw you jump 8 meters in the air? Dragon Ball Z plays the superhero tropes straight, with Videl eternally suspicious but never quite sure, requiring a much more explicit reveal. I like the manga's joke, but my problem has always been that it rushes to the punchline, introducing a superhero pastiche, but never actually playing in it before knocking it down. That makes it feel like a pointless detour. Besides, Dragon Ball has already demonstrated its world plays these tropes straight. We have the flimsily disguised Jackie Chun pulling out the signature move of the Muten Roshi, and the one guy who deduces the truth is treated like a loon and gaslighted into disbelieving his own reality. As such, I can't think of this as anything other than one of the greatest accomplishments the animated adaptation ever makes. I do have to cut in and disclose my potential biases, though. In the summer of 2000, a few months before we in America got the Cell arc dubbed, I started purchasing fan subs. My very first order was of 3 tapes, 2 of which covered the finale of the 21st Tenkaichi Budokai, and the last of which was the first 4 Great Saiyaman episodes. It was the first time I ever saw episodes of Dragon Ball in Japanese. The Great Saiyaman episodes were original broadcast recordings, complete with 1993 commercials. It is the purest Dragon Ball viewing experience I have ever had, and will probably ever have. I went out of my way to get portions of the franchise that were nothing like anything I'd ever seen before, that nobody I knew had ever seen before. I was fascinated with the idea of little Gohan, whom I'd most recently seen looking like this, grown up in a different setting with a different cast of characters. I carried these tapes around to all my friends that summer, and it made me pretty cool. So yes, these episodes mean a lot to me personally, and I will never not love them for those reasons. But for what it's worth, I do think these additions are what this section needed. Honestly, the biggest issue with expanding Great Saiyaman's role in the story is that it ultimately doesn't make sense that he isn't a huge celebrity at the tournament. Aside from his classmates, everyone seems to think he's some random idiot in a costume. And that works in the manga, where he makes 2 public appearances prior to this, only one of which is witnessed by a decent amount of people. In the animated continuity, he's a well-known hero in a well-known city. By the time Gohan hangs up his helmet, they're already making movies about him. And who is that as the director and first AD? Why, it's Red and Black. They've given up their lives of crime, as well as their lives of being mutilated corpses, to start a career in Hollywood. Satan would? No, let's not say that ever. I do have to say, though, that Gohan landing a role in the Great Saiyaman movie and the director criticizing his posing and slogans as being too stupid for a real hero is still one of the funniest things I've ever seen. This filler features a lot of cameos, both from Dragon Ball and outside it. Getting my hands on Toriyama's one-shots has really taught me a lot about how often the animated series takes designs from Toriyama's other works. The leader of the Red Rock Gang, Great Saiyaman fights, is from Toriyama's Dub and Peter 1. One of his underlings is Dub from Dub and Peter 1. Heck, one of the most famous filler characters, Maron, is lifted straight out of Cashman. But perhaps the first example of this I was made aware of is... Angela. Angela is the girl who blackmails Gohan into a date. And I love this episode, particularly the repeated gag of Gohan screaming whenever Angela is about to tell Videl his secret. It's my absolute favorite Great Saiyaman episode, despite its weird Goku Chi-Chi first date flashback that couldn't have possibly ever happened. It's the most ridiculous of sitcom plots, being predicated on a wacky misunderstanding that preserves the status quo. But it is incredibly cute. Angela is a completely flighty character who jumps from anger to excitement at the drop of a hat, thrilled to be on a date, and constantly stymied at it not living up to her romanticized expectations. Gohan, in turn, does not understand any of this, particularly why she doesn't get why he has to run off to be a champion of justice, given he assumes she already knows. I will begrudgingly admit it kind of undercuts Videl blackmailing Gohan 2 episodes later, because Angela does a much better job wrapping Gohan around her finger. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to look at it quite the same way in the past few years. See, when I did the DBD episode about Yamcha being rewritten as a dirty cheater, I complained about how it recontextualizes his and Bluma's relationship into something far darker than I thought Toriyama would actually write. Then I got a bunch of people countering, but what about Lady Red? So what about Lady Red? Well, Lady Red's a one-shot Toriyama drew in 1987 that actually makes me feel compelled to put up a content warning before I go any further, so thanks for that. Lady Red is about an office worker who decides to fulfill her dream of becoming a superhero. Turns out she's really bad at that, but she is really good at being sexually assaulted by every perp she chases down, so much so that at the end she decides it'd be much more lucrative for her to become a prostitute. That's the whole joke! Anyway, that's Angela. I'm not sure if there's any good way to segue out of this. As long as I'm on the subject of Gohan's high school setting, Shapna gets one more role later on as his presence at the tournament is expanded. Apparently he's in love with Videl? That's a thing? Videl, for her part, seems to hate him now? It's only been 6 episodes since we last saw him and his character's been totally rewritten. Because of that, he's jealous of Great Saiyaman's connection with her and tries to one-up him by snapping a picture that reveals his true identity. Hijinks ensue, which are pretty annoying. What's most impressive about it is that it ties into the original story, as Shopner's scheming is brought to a premature end when Piccolo destroys all the arena's recording devices. They at least add an appropriate reaction later on when the teens do find out who Great Saiyaman is. Ereza and Shopner make a final filler appearance near the end of the series, during the Genki Dama montages. This one's pretty stupid though because they're at school. I'm guessing there was no thought put into this beyond, oh, those are Gohan's classmates from school, so let's put them in school so people know who they are. The fact that they're in school means that they died there. That's not entirely impossible, but it seems unlikely given that Majin Buu starts terrorizing the world almost immediately after the tournament, which was also a deadly and traumatic event. Even before Buu wipes out the rest of the population, we see that society has more or less collapsed. Oh, but can't miss a day of school, everything's normal, doop-de-doop. These two latter-day additions aside, the Great Saiyaman rewrite comprises some of the best filler in the series. It's probably the first since the Saiyan arc that practically feels like required viewing. They're fluffy little adventures taken on their own, but together they make the pacing better and the character dynamics far more believable. Geez, Great Saiyaman is such a huge addition, I already filled out a whole episode with it. Like I said last time, hope you're not in a hurry. After this point, the main story starts being adapted far more faithfully, so things will be a bit more normal for a DBD TV installment. However, there are many other changes and additions to go. Thanks so much for watching. You are angels and you got a power. A big thanks to my patrons. I'd never want to erase their contributions. If you want to see videos like this early, go 10. That is to say, go join the $10 and up Patreon tier. Have a great Saiyaman day! Whee! Oh boy.